Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be talking about a theory that I had. Yep, that's right. Yours truly actually had a theory, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't been debunked, unlike my Ace Attorney multiverse theory. So, a lot of people have been talking about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and how it seems like a very brave move of the American localization team to call it Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I believe the Japanese title is Super Smash Bros. Special, but I don't want to confuse you guys. Let's just focus on the North American title. Anywho, I'm normally one that complains a lot about Nintendo's choice of titles in their games, one of the worst being Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE. However, from a poetic, as far as quite literal standpoint, I think Super Smash Bros. Ultimate gets the job done more than perhaps any other game Nintendo has ever named. And let me tell you why. First off, I think a lot of us get the word ultimate confused. When we think of the word ultimate in a video game, we think it means everything that we've ever wanted and that it's perfect and back to form. Like, people will say, well, the ultimate Zelda game needs to have the best graphics, and the ultimate Zelda game needs to have the stellar orchestral soundtrack. Well, at least that's what I would say. But we're forgetting that that's only one meaning of the word. In fact, the word ultimate can also mean primary. Like, first off, if you've ever played Virtue's Last Reward, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it. But there's a part where they're like, well, what's the point of all these crazy things that we're meant to do? And the reveal character, which I'm not going to say, responds with the ultimate purpose of why we locked you guys up was because, and it ended up being the reason behind everything. Now, when you say ultimate, that didn't exactly mean great. The characters were not thrilled to be placed into that kind of environment. They were filled with all sorts of deadly traps. That would be pretty terrible if they said this is the ultimate game. However, that was a secondary goal. Just like when you're trying to make a point, you might say, ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is... So then the question is, if that's the secondary meaning of the word ultimate, then how does that apply to this game, you might be asking? Well, for starters, let's think about what Super Smash Bros. Was all about. When Sakurai was first approached with the idea to do Super Smash Bros. Back in 1999, granted it was called something different back then, but the ultimate goal was, see, I'm doing it again. The primary goal was that he wanted to create an accessible fighter, something that would be easy to get into but very hard to master. And that led to quite a few unique features that had never been seen before in a fighting game. One of which was that instead of giving the character enough damage to finally kill them, instead you would build up a damage meter and that would send them farther when you hit them, and thus knocking them off the border of the stage or the bottom would be the way to get a KO. In addition, there was a heavy focus on platforming on most of the stages, and a lot of it would feel very familiar to fans of the Kirby series, which coincidentally was directed by the same guy that actually invented Kirby. That being said, Super Smash Bros. Was a pretty basic game when it came out. It had 2 minigames, only 1 single-player mode, and a pretty lackluster versus mode. It only had 12 characters, 8 of which were unlocked from the start, and it only had 9 stages, of which 8 were unlocked from the start. Yeah, this is going off great. Oh, and also there was only 1 song per stage back then. No My Music back in 1999. But yet, it got the job done for its time for being quite possibly the best multiplayer game on the Nintendo 64, and one of the best fighting game multiplayer experiences ever made by some purists. Now, granted, it's been outdone by its sequels, but on the other hand, have those sequels achieved ultimate status? Sure, there are people that are going to say Melee is the pinnacle of perfection, but that doesn't necessarily make it ultimate. First off, let's look at some of the stuff that Melee added. It had trophies, sure, the home run contest, target test, plus it also had that living room where you could look at all the trophies. And while those were good additions, and I'm certainly glad that they helped evolve the series, they weren't exactly the crux of what made Super Smash Bros. Unique. Instead, they expanded on the idea, but didn't exactly go back to basics. They just said, let's take everything great about the past Super Smash Bros. And let's add a couple of new stuff, because, we kind of can. The GameCube's much more powerful. And for a 14-month development cycle, that was not bad at all. As much as I have to say against Melee nowadays, back then that was a technological masterpiece. Now let's look over at Brawl. Brawl introduced even more stuff. Arguably, Brawl probably brought the biggest contributions as far as taking the series forward since the first game. Now, you might say other games have had more content, but Brawl was where it all started, going from let's add a couple of new characters and stages to let's cram as much as we can into this Wii disc, so much that the game's box is going to be heavier than the average Wii game. We have the Stage Builder, we have the Subspace Emissary, more target tests. Well, technically there's only 5, but at least they were all different from the ones in Melee. Plus, the home run contest is coming back. Plus, now there's stickers in addition to trophies. And there's masterpieces. You see where I'm getting at there? While the fighting experience is technically still there, there's a lot of distractions. In the Subspace Emissary, hardly any of the enemies have damage meters. Instead, you have to defeat them like you would in a typical fighting game. Same thing with the boss battles. The boss battles were not done by knocking them off the stage. In fact, back then, Ridley was exclusive to being a boss. And you had to defeat Ridley the same way that you did in the Metroid series, by just pounding on the damage until Ridley finally, exploded. Now, I'm not saying any of this is bad by any means, but there are definitely fans that will prefer one over the other. A lot of casual players will say that Brawl was too casual, and then Melee is too competitive. Well, the thing is, Sakurai wanted the game to be accessible first and foremost. He didn't want this total bias where people are like, no items, Fox only, Final Destination. And that's fine if you want to do it that way. Personally, I think that's kind of boring because I like all the beautiful scenery and the nice chaotic variety, but that's just me. I'm a casual player. I'm allowed to have my opinions. But it deviated from the original intent, and not only that, but it seemed like the series was leaning more towards gimmicks than toward a natural evolution. Now let's take Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U, the latter being quite possibly the biggest offender in taking the series away from what it means to be ultimate. First off, Smash for 3DS and Wii U introduced a ton of new modes to the series, but how many of them were actually in the core of Smash Bros? You've got Smash Tour, which of course led you into battles, but it was very, how shall I word this, disorganized and chaotic and very hard to learn. Wasn't the point of Super Smash Bros. To be an accessible fighter? Why is it that even during the Nintendo or Smash Direct where Smash Tour was revealed, Sakurai himself had trouble explaining it? If the director of his own game can't even describe one of his game modes, that means you've got a problem. There is also the difficulty curve with the intensity gauge for classic mode and just feeling more out of control. In the original Super Smash Bros., classic mode was a couple of minigames, plus it was predictable, and you had a structure. In Smash for 3DS and Wii U, that structure was thrown almost entirely out the window. Street Smash was a mode exclusive to Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, and it felt more like a World Ends With You clone than a true Smash Bros. Successor. Sure, you could shield and dodge, but it didn't feel like a Smash Bros. Game. Not only that, but it got rid of the story mode, which isn't necessarily a bad thing on paper, but in a sense, it sort of had an identity crisis. And that's where Super Smash Bros. Ultimate comes in. Now, what does it do differently? Well, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have already pointed this out, as evidenced by the countless 0 out of 10 reviews from users on Metacritic, but Super Smash Bros. Ultimate actually removed a lot of content with the intent of the biggest focus, according to Sakurai, being that everyone is here. Now, when he says everyone is here, he means everyone in Smash Brothers is here. So if you're hoping for the Burger King or Shrek to get in, well, that's what mods are for, I guess. Not that I'm endorsing it for the Switch, but just saying people will do it anyway, even if I tell them not to. The point being, a lot of people are like, what happened to Home Run Contest? What happened to Masterpieces? What happened to All-Star Mode? Well, technically that's sort of in, but that's a discussion for another day. What happened was that they were taking away from the core ultimate goal of the Super Smash Bros. Series, and that's to fight. Ever wonder why the first two sequels to Super Smash Bros. Had a subtitle that was a synonym to the word fight? It's because Sakurai wanted to improve on the fighting experience, and most people would say he succeeded in Super Smash Bros. Melee. But I'm pretty sure even the most hardcore Melee purists would have a hard time saying that about any of Melee's supplementary modes. Like, would anyone say, oh, Home Run Contest is the pinnacle of balanced character perfection? Or, oh man, Sakurai really knew what he was doing when he introduced single button Melee. Most people ignore that kind of stuff. They just want to go straight to the smashing, straight to the tournament. And that's what Ultimate did, first and foremost. By bringing every character back, it ensured that you could have your dream fight come true. Most of the stages were actually returning stages, and the Nintendo 64 stages in particular are notorious for receiving the least graphical overhauls out of any of the stages brought back. Now, you might be thinking that's a lazy design choice, but think about it. Smash 64 was where it all started. And perhaps this was Sakurai's way of saying, back then, the stages were much more simple and to the point. The gimmicks hardly ever got in the way, and even if they did, you'd hardly notice that they were gone. Because Super Smash Bros. Was designed first and foremost to be an accessible fighter. And it's kind of hard to be accessible when you've got cars racing at you at high speeds in Big Blue, or Hanenbo just being Hanenbo. Actually, I really like that stage. I'm just saying that for the fan base, not for me. And so, ultimately, oh my gosh, how many times am I going to make this pun during this script? The goal here is to create a good fighting experience. Now, some people might say, well, Paul, it's still not Melee. I'm citing you, Nathaniel Bandy, if you're watching this. And that's okay. Everyone's allowed to have their opinions. But you know what? Sakurai can't read minds. But one thing he can say is he knew that even if one person was left out of the roster, people would complain. Overall, Sakurai's always been more about fun than story. Notice how most of the games he's worked on don't have a particularly compelling narrative. Even Kid Icarus Uprising, which is probably the most story-driven game he's ever worked on, doesn't really take itself seriously most of the time, and the plot could probably be summarized in 5 minutes. He wanted to make sure that when creating the adventure mode, known as World of Light in this game, that it would focus more on fun than story. But does that necessarily mean that the story doesn't conclude in an ultimate fight? After all, that is what the title, the main theme of the game says. You know, the light will guide you on your way to the ultimate fight. So there's a variety of interpretations as to how this could play out, seeing as it's a very abstract song in a Smash Brothers game which is not normally known for being abstract. There's a variety of ways you can interpret it. But I'd like to think that the most popular opinion is that it's referring to the adventure mode and trying to cue your attention to this is the core of what we're getting at. But in Ultimate's case, it's not the core of Smash Brothers, it's the core of gaming. Why do you think the final boss in Smash for 3DS and Wii U is called the Master Core? It's going back to the center of it's fun to play these games. These old stages are being brought back. Old characters are returning, with Sakurai saying don't expect too many newcomers. World of Light doesn't do much that's particularly innovative in the Smash Brothers series. Instead, it dredges up a lot of familiar memories. When people get to the Street Fighter area on the World of Light map, they say, wow, this is a faithful recreation of what it used to be like when playing Street Fighter in the arcades. When you get to the Donkey Kong Country map, you're like, this is what it felt like to play Donkey Kong Country. Then there's the spirits themselves, which people may say, oh, those are just lazy PNG files. But if you're going to name a game Ultimate, it makes perfect sense. The trophies had to be designed from scratch, from Melee to Smash for Wii U. But then Sakurai didn't want to have too many new 3D models when he made his single-player mode. And that's where the spirits came in as the replacements for trophies. They're the actual images used in strategy guides, promotional pictures, you name it, for the various games in which they came from. To say, this is their essence. This is their soul. This is their soil reclaimed from the past. In the theme song, the characters singing are obviously the fighters when they say, on that day when the sky fell away, our world came to an end. Yes, the fighters were all obliterated, except for Kirby, because Kirby can copy abilities. Well, that's not the reason he survived. I'm saying because for the sake of the theory. Kirby can take on the attributes of other fighters. In other words, he takes their cores with him. In fact, the word core is also used when referring to the spirits. You can take a spirit's core in order to make new spirits. And honestly, wouldn't you say that that's a good way of describing what makes a good sequel? Is not losing track of what made the first game or third game or something special in the first place. That's, again, the Japanese title for this game is Super Smash Bros. Special. Special doesn't necessarily have to mean unique. Special can also mean a unique place or a special, like, dear part of you. Like when you say you're my special child, it doesn't necessarily mean favorite. It just means that there's something about you that is unique, captivating. But it can also, again, mean sort of a back to basics approach. Kirby is the most accessible character out of the entire roster. Arguably Mario could make a good case, but you unlock him second in World of Light. By the time you get to the end of World of Light, the final battle ends up being not much of a payoff in terms of if you're asking for a concrete story. It's more of the fight was there to provide a fight, and that's it. And honestly, that's okay, because maybe Gleam is not supposed to have an origin. Maybe there's not supposed to be lore about World of Light at all, and that's the point Sakurai was trying to make. See, Smash Bros. For 64 was successful even though it didn't have a story mode. Super Smash Bros. Melee may have had an adventure mode, but it didn't have a story. Yes, Brawl had a story, but it also had a lot of cutscenes, and that's primarily what people remember it for. I think a lot of people, if they were to look at Subspace Emissary without the cutscenes, they would probably be really disappointed and say, oh, this is just another mediocre platforming game. Why couldn't this have been the next Mario or Kirby game? Well, because it was supposed to be Smash Brothers characters fighting together against one giant evil. But what if that wasn't the core of Super Smash Brothers? What if it ended up having fan service at the sacrifice of fun? That can really cost a game if you think about it. I mean, look at Fire Emblem Fates. That game is so criticized by the fan base. Why? Because it has an abundance of fan service, but not enough Fire Emblem. You see where I'm getting at there? Same thing with Mario Party Advance, which I actually just watched a review of. That game called itself Mario Party, but it hardly felt like a Mario Party at all. It was fan service without the game. So in other words, Sakurai is saying, guys, not only do we want to return to the basics of Smash Brothers by making literally all of the modes except, I guess you might say, the mini game and classic mode, but that's grasping at straws here. We are going to return to what made Super Smash Brothers unique, what made Super Smash Brothers special, and what made Super Smash Brothers Ultimate in the first place. You could say it's kind of like a Groundhog Day effect. We're back to square one, but bigger, better, yet still preserving that original core as though it was being introduced for us for the first time. And that is what Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is all about. At least in my opinion. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. I'm not that great at theorizing, as most of you know, so maybe you have something way better than me. But until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and if you're going to make a game, give it a good title. Bye!